Okay, so we're going to be looking at measurements of arcs of a circle. Now, before I may have said that there are two ways to measure an arc, and that is true. So we're going to look at those two ways. The first one is actually fairly simple. Um, Actually, they both are, but this one will be the most simplest, I believe, for many of you because it will make a lot of sense. It'll be something you're more familiar with. And so, an arc, the first way we measure it is based off of an angle. Well, it's a special type of angle. It's an angle known as a central angle. So, central angle. And so, a central angle is an angle formed from the center of a circle. So, see this? The vertex is at the center of the circle. That is a central angle then. So, that theta there is a central angle. Well, it turns out that this arc here, let's call this circle C. We'll call this point A and point B. So the arc AB here is actually going to be equal to, in measurement, whatever the central angle is. So this is equal to the measure of arc AB. And so sometimes people are more comfortable, and it's honestly, it depends on where you're at and just the understanding between people. Because this M here is generally used to represent measurement. So, but it's usually a measurement of some type of angle or degrees or radians or another form of measuring angles. So degrees, radians, gradients, degrees, minutes, seconds, whichever other form that you want to use. That's what that M is for. It lets you know that you're doing something based off of degrees or radians, based off some kind of measurement of an angle. Okay. Well, the measure of the central angle is equal to the measure of its arc. So this arc is the same thing as this theta. So the measure of this arc is theta in this case. If this was 45, this would be 45. If this was 20, this would be 20. If this was 180, that would be 180. And it always works out that way. So that's the first way that we measure arcs. We measure them based off of angles. So if you were given, say, another one here, and let's say you saw a right angle, then we would know then that, hey, this is 90 degrees. The arc AD is 90 degrees. All right. Well, let's say instead we drew a diameter, and I told you AF is a diameter. Well, we know that this whole thing here has to be 180 degrees because this is a semicircle. That means that this arc ABF is also 180 degrees. It has to be because the angle here, the central angle, the angle formed at the center is 180 degrees. All right. That's very, very simple, and keep it simple. The measurement of an arc is equal to the measure of its central angle. So the angle that's formed at the center of the circle. Okay. So that's the first way. The second way we will get in a lot more detail in another video, but just to give you a beginning with it, let's look at the circle as a whole. So the circle as a whole, circle C here, we know the measure of the degrees of this circle, right? It's 360 degrees. That's correct. Okay. Well, we also know about radians, and we've talked before where radians comes from. That's another measurement of angles, right? Well, radians is based off how the distance around the circle you go compared to the radius of a circle. So it turns out we can make a measurement of our arc in the same fashion. So instead of using the degrees or radians or anything like that, what we can do instead is find out what portion of the circle we've gone around. Well, how do we do that? First and foremost, we have to understand this word, circumference. And so circumference is actually the distance around a circle completely in radians. So it's 2 pi radians. And we multiply that times whatever the radius is. Because if the radius is 1, it's just 2 pi, which makes sense because the complete distance around a circle would be 2 pi radians or 360 degrees. But if we're going halfway around, this should just be pi, right? Which we know from converting degrees, 180 degrees to radians was pi radians. Okay. So the circumference to find the distance around the circle as a whole would be 2 pi times r. Well, if I just want to know what is the arc AB measure, and I don't want it in degrees or based off an angle, I can do the same thing. I can take the arc, and we call it arc length, and that's going to be equal to whatever this angle measurement is times r. Because the angle measurement for the circumference was 2 pi radians. If we know the angle measurement here, all we have to do is multiply times r. But we'll see how to do that in another video. But just to give you a heads up, because this is another way we measure arcs. We measure arcs based off the central angle here. And then we can also take that central angle measurement and multiply it times whatever the radius is to find what we call arc length. And so I'll see you soon so we can work on the other way to measure an arc.